knight as art, the necessity of chivalry. The modern Western man arrived in this life placed among the ruins of a chivalrous tradition. It was a tradition that blended the warrior traditions of ancient Greece and Celtic pagans with the morality of Jerusalem. Its ideal was embodied by the knights in King Arthur's court. When we think of chivalry today, we think of opening doors and walking on the traffic side of the pavement to protect your partner. Admirable and romantic gestures, but the type of chivalry I'm talking about in this post is much less domesticated. We see a description of this chivalric ideal in Sir Thomas Malory's La Mort d'Arthur, when Sir Hector praises a dead Launcelot with these words: "Thou wert the meekest man that ever ate in the hall among ladies, and thou wert the sternest knight to thy mortal foe that ever put spear in the rest." Pointing to this line in his essay, The Necessity of Chivalry, which inspired this video, C.S. Lewis called attention to how this highlights the double demand of the medieval ideal called chivalry. Quote, "The most important thing about the ideal of chivalry is, of course, the double demand it makes on human nature. The knight is a man of blood and iron, a man familiar with the sight of smashed faces and ragged stumps of lopped-off limbs. He's also a demure, almost a maiden-like guest in the hall, gentle, modest, unobtrusive man. He's not a compromise or happy mean between ferocity and meekness. He is fierce to the nth degree and meek to the nth." End quote. C.S. Lewis, The Necessity of Chivalry. Before Beowulf and knighthood introduced Christian values into the hero, heroism overemphasized the warrior side of man's psyche. Quote, "Homer's Achilles knows nothing of the demand that the brave should also be the modest and the merciful." End quote. Attila and the Romans were quick to cut throats. Quote, "Such is heroism by nature, heroism outside the chivalrous tradition." End quote. But the medieval ideal, Lewis continues, quote, "brought together two things which have no natural tendency to gravitate towards one another." End quote. Quote, "It taught humility and forbearance to the great warrior because everyone knew by experience how much he usually needed that lesson. It demanded valor of the urbane and modest man because everyone knew that he was likely as not to be a milksop. In doing so, the Middle Ages fixed on the one hope of the world." End quote. Lewis argued that when the disintegration of the two halves of Launcelot happens, when the lion separates from the lamb, we condemn ourselves to the cycle of rising and falling civilizations, where conquerors become soft and civilized only to be conquered themselves. Quote, "Those who have force on loan from fate count on it too much and are, in time, destroyed." Simone Weil, The Poem of Force. By adding the quality of meekness to the heroic, the chivalric ideal offers a way out of this doom. But excess force isn't the only thing to be avoided. If the ancient overemphasized the warrior and excluded modesty in the ideal, then modernity makes the opposite mistake, overemphasizing the quality of meekness and excluding the warrior. With modernity's domestication of man, it carves out half of his spirit and leaves him a hollow man. Quote, "We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in their midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful." End quote. C.S. Lewis, Abolition of Man. From the Middle Ages comes the middle way. Quote, "The ideal embodied by Launcelot offers the only possible escape from a world divided between wolves who do not understand and sheep who cannot defend, the things which make life desirable." End quote. This, to me, sums up my obsession with the idea of Plato's scholar-athlete, the man of thought and the man of action, the wolf who understands and the sheep who can defend, the lion and the lamb, someone supremely modest and kind, yet also ferocious. Something about that blend seems to me precisely right. It is the way of heroes and the Tao of true kings. Where schools and specialized classes in the past were dedicated to these pursuits, today it is the individual's responsibility. Why bother, you might ask? Because men in a desert must find water or die. Because the key to our wholeness as individuals in society rests in our ability to integrate the fragmented pieces of our core and alchemically combine seemingly contrasting characteristics: fierceness and meekness, spiritual and physical, tradition and invention, ancient and future, heaven and earth, bodybuilding and poetry. To identify and fuse these traits is to imbue our spirit and revitalize it with what's been lost. We make ourselves into our finest masterpiece. Quote, "The man who combines both characters, the knight, is a work not of nature but of art, of that art which has human beings instead of a canvas or marble for its medium." End quote. We may not have the same barbarians at our gates as our ancestors, but there are still ways to recover at least part of the warrior and wild man. We may yet find ways to make ourselves into the art exemplified by Launcelot. Angel Miller offers this advice for the modern man in search of recovering the forgotten half of his soul. Quote, "Do not make yourself into a cliché. Defy easy categorization. Strive to cultivate what is uncomfortable to you. If you are a daydreamer and a romantic and consider yourself soft, passive, intellectual, or artistic, cultivate skills of action, such as martial arts or an intense physical sport. If you consider yourself to be hard or a man of action, take up meditation, write poetry, or take up painting. Learn from a master. Cultivate the different aspects of your being to become more three-dimensional, more fully present, more alive, and more difficult to classify. Cultivate a deeper and wider sense of your own being. Take control of your life. Make things. Develop your body. Respect the great martial arts and the great poets. When men have nothing that they are passionate about, nothing concrete that they love and find engaging, nothing they can mold with their own hands and through their own sweat, they become fanatics about ideas, ideologies, and theories which, although filling them with a sense of purpose, slowly drain the life out of them."